Good morning. My name's Elke. I'm going to start with a few announcements, and then I will move into my formal introduction of our keynote speaker today. A couple of announcements. The first thing is that all the meals today, they're listed in your program elsewhere, but they have been moved to the Alumni Memorial Union, which is the building right behind us, or the AMU, as it says on the sidewalk chalking. So the keynote and lunch today, and the awards banquet and dinner and town hall tonight, excuse me, are all in there. We have errata sheets. We do have program changes, last minute things due to flights and things like that. Sometimes panelists need to move around. So please check out the registration desk for a physical errata sheet. Watch the Twitter stream for some changes there. Those will be tweeted out from the CWCon account. Also, there is a message board, a big broad message board. The big whiteboard that's in the registration desk will also have the errata information. Right behind that is a CWCon message board where you could write. I know that Doug Iman is seeking a JavaScript expert, and last night Michael Day tweeted out that he is looking for a Drupal expert to help him recover the CWCon archive. So if you're looking for that, today we will start having our exhibitors, and our breakfast and snacks have moved down to the west lobby. So it was with registration yesterday, but now it's in the other end. There's a nice lounge there. You can hang out, sit around, and that's where the poster session will be tomorrow. So you can go check that out and see where that's going to be. The Mazza Museum is listed as one of your Wonder Workshop options on Sunday morning, but I know a lot of people might be gone by then. That Wonder Workshop is great. You're going to get to actually go into the art vault and see their actual collection. It was the first collection of children's illustrated art, the original art that goes into children's illustrated books. And Will Hillenbrand is going to talk about that. Cool, how that connects to what we're doing here and how cool that is. But the Mazza Museum, if you're not going to be here Sunday, is going to be open today from noon to 5. It's in the Gardner Fine Arts Pavilion building right next to us. It is an amazing space, like my favorite space on campus. I take all my classes there to talk about document design. I teach technical writing, and I go to an art museum to talk about document design. It's really fun. So if you aren't going to be here Sunday or have other sessions Sunday morning, I would definitely encourage you to check that out. And then just after this, I know it's the first morning, so there's lots of things going on. We do have 3 different things called the Wonder Workshops going on throughout the conference as well. The one that is immediately after this keynote address, and it does conflict with the A sessions, so if you're presenting an A session, sorry. The one this morning is at the Black Heritage Multicultural Center and Library, and you'll get to hear a presentation about a Negro baseball player from Findlay and how we think about who is remembered and who is archived and how is that presented. And the 2 graduate students who are presenting that from our Masters of Rhetoric and Writing program are really excited to share with you. The shuttle for that, the shuttle is provided. It's no extra cost. The workshop's free to you. The shuttle will actually depart from the AMU Circle Drive, which is right behind us. So after the keynote, you can kind of head over there if that's something that you're interested in doing. I wish I could, oh yeah, that's my note. I'm like, I'm not sure if I can read that. I think that's all of them. So thank you very much. Welcome. Please come in. Please come in. So as I said before, good morning and welcome to the opening session of Computers and Writing 2017 at the University of Findlay. My name's Elke Burnside. I'm an assistant professor of English here at UF, and it is my distinct pleasure as the chair of the planning committee to welcome you with excitement and anticipation as we enter into the space of wonder that is CNW. My first experience with the rhetoric and writing community at large happened while attending the 2005 Conference on College Composition and Communication in San Francisco. I got to meet Cindy Self for the first time there, and then I learned that my passion for communication was shared with a huge sea of attendees that I kind of felt a little lost within. I was fortunate enough to continue in my academic journey and first encountered the CNW community in 2012 at North Carolina State University. Starry-eyed at meeting so many of my intellectual heroes in person, I began to realize that there's something that shapes this conference and the scholars who attend it. Joining in the C&W conversation over and over by attending, presenting, and now ultimately hosting, I've come to realize that the central thread for this group is that we enjoy exploring the process of our craft. We derive pleasure in shaping our understanding of the tools we use to develop the art of communication, and we work together to explore how to bring this messy, complex, and beautiful, and dare I say, wonderful, you might be tired of that word at the end, challenge of communicating via technological mediation to our students and others around us. In other words, we like the Tecna behind our words, images, and designs for sharing our ideas with others. My continued experiences with the C&W community have helped that initial lost feeling dwindle as my awe, wonder, and interrogation of just how my own knowledge of rhetorical practices influenced my thinking. And somewhere during these early experiences is when I first encountered the writings of our keynote speaker this morning, Dr. James Porter. Currently professor in the Department of English in the Armstrong Institute for Interactive Media Studies at Miami University, Dr. Porter's work focuses on rhetoric, ethics, and communication. As we open the conference today with a consideration of how the lines between art and craft can blur through the type of close examination that C&W scholars bring to bear, Dr. Porter's work on Tecna's role in the modern university and where this field may be headed in the future can help develop our understanding of this craft even more. I offer an invitation to use the conversations and experiences you developed this weekend as a way to continue to push the boundaries of wonder in your work, departments, and local institutions. Think about your time at UF this weekend as a way to reopen or develop for the first time a stronger relationship with ways that wonder, through deep consideration, can develop wonder through appreciation for the tasks that we all pursue and continue to develop. As one way to explore this invitation, please join me today in welcoming Dr. James Porter as he shares why Tecna needs praxis and what that may mean to this scholar of community.
Thank you, Elke. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very glad that you're all here on a sunny morning, a bright sunny morning, very early, to hear a talk on Tecna. Why would anybody do that? I don't have a body of work that on Tecna. I haven't been working on it until just like the last 18 months or so, because for most of my career I didn't know what it was, and I couldn't figure it out. And so this is kind of daring for me to figure out what Tecna is, might be, how it works. I've been thinking about it a lot. And so what I'm going to talk about today is really an exploration of the term, the concept. And I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes and then leave, I hope, some good time for discussion and questions. Everybody hearing me okay? That's good, thank you. Oh, by the way, please text while I'm talking. It makes me very nervous if people are listening to me talk. I would rather that you texted and hashtagged away and had conversations, public and private, about things as we go. My point today is a very simple one. And it's something you already know, and it's something that I know that you're already doing. But what I hope this talk does is provide a little bit of reinforcement, maybe some additional historical rationale for what you're doing, because I know you need it when you make your arguments to the folks back home, the administration back home. Rhetoric is a Tecna, we know that, but it is also a praxis, or should be. That is to say, it's aimed at practical, transformative connection with the world. So the purpose of rhetoric is not just to make a symbolic artifact, a speech or a piece of writing, a web page or a weaving. The purpose is to provide value or benefit to somebody, to do good work in the world, to change the world from its current state to some potentially better state. None of this is a surprise to anybody here. The classical rhetoricians said this, and they said it quite clearly and emphatically in a number of places, but over time that message was degraded. Rhetoric as Tecna became confused with tribe, mechanical process. It lost its connection to praxis, theoretically and structurally, institutionally. I'll talk about that as well. And so we have a fight on our hands. We have to struggle to maintain the connection because the historical tradition has treated us badly, because we are housed in a university system that is not very well designed to support our art, and because the current, you've heard them, financial exigencies, so-called, seem to be moving even farther away from support of what we do. Our class sizes are going up. So I want to do two main things today. I want to talk about Tecna and Praxis, and also, importantly, its relationship with knowledge. Although I hate the term knowledge, I want to call it knowledges. There are multiple forms of knowledge that rhetoric deals with, and we collapse them all into one term, and then we lose a lot of the nuance of what we're doing, I think. And secondly, I want to talk about university mission and organizational structure, and what are we going to do about that. So I'm going to start with Theoria and end up with Praxis, I hope. Does this talk have anything to do with computers and writing? Yes, I think it does, but it's going to be more implicit than explicit, and I hope we can talk about that, surface that in the discussion period. My view of the field of computers and writing is that you folks have gotten Tecna better than anybody else in the field. You understand how Tecna works, particularly, but not only, the material side of Tecna and how integral that is to rhetorical action. But first, a story. This is a confession, actually. I was originally a skeptic who doubted that computers really belonged in rhetoric. I think it's safe to say that now. So in 1977, it was actually exactly 40 years ago this week, I met Hugh Burns. He was attending the 2-week rhetoric seminar at the University of Detroit that was sponsored by Janice Lauer, and I was a graduate student assistant director at the seminar. And one evening, Hugh and I are sitting in the bar having beers and talking, and I asked Hugh what he was working on. And he said something like, "I'm developing a computer program to assist with rhetorical invention." Wow, I thought to myself, this poor guy is really deluded. Smart guy, very smart, but definitely headed in the wrong direction. Computers can't do our thinking. Computers can't do rhetoric. Computers and rhetoric, opposite things. AI, give me a break. Poor guy's career is in the tank. So that's where I was in 1977. Okay, 11 years later, 1988, my thinking hadn't changed very much until I found myself as a new faculty member at Purdue University. And one of my new colleagues is Pat Sullivan, and another new colleague, my office suite mate, is Gail Haywisher. They shaped me up pretty quickly. When I came to Purdue, the other thing that happened was the department threw me immediately into teaching a computer classroom. They didn't ask me, I didn't want this, they just did it. I think Pat Sullivan had something to do with this. So 2 weeks before classes started, I'm in a panic, and I spend probably 60 hours in the lab trying to figure out how to teach writing with computers. It was a total panic, crash course, but I was sitting next to people like Pat Sullivan, Bob Johnson, Jenny Dauterman, all of us working on our classes together. And by the end of that first year, thanks to the guidance and support and patience of a lot of people, I think I got it. I saw the essential connection between technology and rhetoric. So that's a huge frame shift for me. And that's what I'm talking about today. The frames that we have in place in our heads for teaching writing with computers. What is that frame? What is it exactly we are doing, particularly as pertains to our Tecna? What we do in the classroom, that's one version of Tecna, and then how we talk about it. What are the terms we use? What are the parameters? What's the size of our Tecna bucket? How much stuff is in there? That's really important, and that's something I think it's worth reflecting on. So that's what I want to talk about today, frame. So first frame shift. Rhetoric is action. J.L. Austin said this in 1955. Once we realize that what we have to study is not the sentence but the issuing of an utterance in a speech situation, there can hardly be any longer a possibility of not seeing that stating is performing an act. The speech act is a bodily act, Judith Butler, 1997. These are not new ideas now. These were dramatically new ideas in their time and place and disciplinary locations. In 1955, Austin, a speech act theorist and linguist, recognized, whoa, language isn't sentences, language is performance. It took him a while to get to that. He noticed first that some speech acts had what he called perlocutionary force. They are performing if they bring a new reality into existence by their expression, like the phrase "I do" at a wedding, or a legal injunction, like a judge's decision. But once Austin discovered perlocution, he was dead, right? He was on the slippery slope and his distinction broke down, because doesn't all language do this? It's a feature of all language. Judith Butler's work on performativity works right at the same juncture. The speech act is not only words, it is also a person's body exhibiting certain behaviors, movements, gestures within a particular scene and space, at a particular time and place and cultural moment, to a particular audience that help constitute its overall meaning. And the body can be a virtual body. In her book, Excitable Speech, Butler focuses on injurious speech, hate speech, pointing out that such speech, particularly harmful to women and people of color, is based not just on the words per se, but on the context of the delivery, which includes historical and cultural context, not just immediate context. And I think excitable speech is of immense relevance to the campus free speech issue right now. Does the First Amendment allow us to say anything we want at any time to anyone? Clearly no. A performative or Burkean or Butlerian view of rhetoric does not look just at the words themselves, it looks at context, the scene, the location, the people. A noose hung from a tree is not protected speech because it performs an action. It constitutes a physical threat. It's an effort to maintain a certain view of reality, a white supremacist frame that attempts to reposition where we all stand relative to one another. It is an attempt to position our bodies. So the performative view of language does a very important thing. It configures rhetoric as embodied action in the world. It means that rhetoric is not just about saying, it is about doing and acting. It's part of the art. And the classical rhetoricians said this too, although the historical tradition didn't particularly surface that aspect of their work, I don't think. So let's do a deep dive into Tecna. We got the term from classical Greek rhetoric, of course, and it refers to the skill or craft of making something, including making a speech. But as I tell my graduate students, defining is a very dangerous thing to do. By itself, it's politically problematic. It simplifies things for comprehension's sake, but in doing that, it hides the complexities, it hides the histories, it hides the stories about the tensions and battles that are going on over the term. You've got to understand the battles, and you have to understand the conceptual system, the ideological grid, or what Foucault would have called the discursive formation, the system in which the term sits. Tecna as opposed to what, within what system of knowledge or human activity. The earliest uses of the term Tecna connected with Greek gods and goddesses who have the gift of art and technology. For instance, Prometheus and his knowledge of fire, which he shared with humans and then was punished for it. The person with Tecna knows how to do something technically and materially, and that art has a value and the person shares it. The shared thing is useful and beautiful, and it intervenes in human affairs in a way that changes the world. Beautiful. Aristotle doesn't talk about beautiful so much. But beautiful is a huge factor. The art includes the beautiful, the beauty of the design, and I'm glad to see that our conference theme pulls in wonder and beauty as part of what Tecna is. That was very much part of a certain part of the classical tradition, but not the part that got carried down historically so much. Socrates identified Tecna activities such as playing the harp, generalship, piloting a ship, cooking, medicine, managing an estate, smithing, and carpentry. Poetry is a Tecna, medicine is a Tecna, carpentry is a Tecna, professional writing is certainly a Tecna. Because Tecna makes things that work in the world, it must address the possibility of changing conditions. The carpenter who knows how to make a rudder must be thinking about the conditions of the sea, the size of the ship, the depth of the port. The carpenter needs to make a rudder that can perform its function, deal with change, and be sustainable, last. That's the art, the Tecna of rudder making. Because Tecna deals with fluctuating conditions like the sea, it is not perfectly predictable or certain. It does not generate a guaranteed outcome. You can build the best rudder in the world, and your ship can still go down. C'est la mer. Tecna includes theoria, and here's where we get to the system part. It includes theoria, broad philosophical knowledge, but it also involves knowledge of materials and tools, as well as principles of construction and design. Back to rudder making. That means knowledge about the properties of wood, knowledge about carving tools, knowledge about design and shaping, as well as knowledge about the physics of the rudder. And that, to me, I think is a key contribution of the field of computers and writing to rhetoric. What is Tecna not? I didn't know Praxis was a megastore. This was news to me. It's a Dutch megastore. This has nothing to do with my talk. Tribe. Tecna is not tribe. It is not mechanical, algorithmic repetition of a task. Tecna is not kakotechne, false art, chicanery, heuristic, manipulation, deception, lying, right out of quintillion. And of course, that's how most of the world defines rhetoric. It's either tribe or kaknotechne. That's not right. We got to fight that. We're going to lose, but we got to fight it. A Tecna is not merely a knack, a practical technique that one simply copies from one situation to another. There's the distinction between a technician and a craftsperson. A technician follows rules but does not know when or how to use them, or most importantly, how to adapt them for different situations and audiences. Tecna requires an integrated transdisciplinary view of the arts. It intersects integrally with politics, ethics, philosophy, design. If you read Aristotle's Rhetoric by itself, rhetoric seems like a distinct sphere with an emphasis on the production side of speech making. But if you read it really as a larger work, rhetoric includes the Rhetoric and Politics and Nicomachean Ethics. If you read the three works together, all sorts of interconnections emerge. It's really one big text. The common aim that ties them all together is the good of the polis, the city-state. What is the ultimate purpose of rhetoric, or that is its telos? For a discussion of telos in the classical realm, we can look at some of Aristotle's other works, works that in rhetoric we seldom read: physics, metaphysics, posterior analytics. Some of Aristotle's most important statements about rhetoric are in those works, not in the rhetoric. I find the rhetoric really a problem, actually. What Aristotle calls the final cause, the end, is that for which a thing is done. So health is the final cause of walking. A person walks in order to be healthy. Walking is the means, health is the telos. So what is the telos of rhetoric? For rhetoricians, it is often the good of the polis, the civic good. And Isocrates says this in Panathenaicus very clearly: the good of the state and the needs of the commonwealth. That is what rhetoric is for. Cicero and Isocrates both critique philosophers for having advanced thinking skills. That's great, but they say this: they are not able to contribute sufficiently to the common good because they make philosophizing the ends rather than the means. Good rhetorician needs a little philosophy, but don't get lost in it, says Isocrates. Doctors need medical knowledge, knowledge of the body, knowledge of medical research, knowledge of anatomy, biochemical knowledge. But they should never forget that the ultimate object and aim of their art is healthy bodies. The art requires epistemic knowledge, but their telos is very much situated. The purpose of good oratory, according to Cicero and De Oratore, is to lead people out of their brutish existence in the wilderness up to a condition of civilization as citizens, to give shape to laws, tribunals, and civic rights, to uphold the safety of individuals and of the entire state. So you can see from this discussion, in those particular classical works, rhetoric and praxis are very much tied up. And by the way, the term praxis doesn't mean practice or practical in this context. When combined with Tecna, it means something a little bit different. It means making something that is beautiful as well as useful. If it's going to be useful, it helps if it's emotionally compelling, aesthetically pleasing. It has some kind of visual, auditory, emotional grasp on the audience. It is something that brings about positive change that matters in the social realm. And quoting from Rhodes and Alexander here, Tecna, Queer Meditations on Writing the Self, the Tecna praxis combination disrupts established thinking or normative discourse, especially when it reinforces injustice and inequity. It disturbs the status quo. It says something is not right, it's got to be changed. That's what we're there for. So classical rhetoricians, emphasize this view. It's a different side, it's a different pieces of classical rhetoric than typically get taught, I would say, in rhetoric history courses. Philosophers of praxis in the 19th and 20th century picked up on a lot of these themes. People like Hannah Arendt, Pierre Bourdieu, Paulo Freire, Karl Marx, they are the philosophers of praxis who are working on this emphasis as well. In Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Freire defines praxis as reflection and action directed at the structures to be transformed, and that pretty much nails the point. I'd add rhetoric into that definition, but that's it. Rhetoric requires reflection, symbolic construction or production that is an action itself directed at something or someone to be transformed. So what are we left with? Rhetoric is a craft that involves multiple kinds of knowledges, come back to that in a minute, that produces a symbolic object that acts in the world, bringing about a positive and transformative change and serves a greater good. So that's, to me, the whole piece. So some key implications of this idea. Rhetoric has to aim at change and transformation. It imagines a different possibility. It looks at potential. In sophistic rhetoric, dynaton. What change can we strive for? What is the ideal or better situation that we want to move toward? That's what rhetoric is for. And that always involves some kind of judgment, phronesis, about what is good, better, best. And of course, now we're getting into another connection with rhetoric, and that's ethics. That good, better, best is going to be contested. If it's an issue that matters to the polis, it's going to be an issue about which there's disagreement and turbulence and so on. And that has to be worked out. And rhetoric always involves other people who are embodily involved. Rhetoric has real consequences for people in the world. So I want to come back to this, this knowledges question, starting with how to make a good cup of coffee. I stand in line at Starbucks a lot, so I'm thinking a lot about the Tecna of making a good cup of coffee. So making a good cup of coffee is not just knowing the mechanical steps of how to make coffee, right? That's tribe. And I hope that the barista does know that, but I hope that's not all they know, right? So there's other stuff involved. Barista knows the properties of coffee, understands the chemistry of the process. There's an episteme of coffee. There's a theoria of coffee. Tecna is how to make a good cup of coffee. Then there's other things. Metis. The barista knows it is safer to put the coffee on the counter rather than in your hand. Cunning knowledge. There's other forms as well. Kairos, phronesis. So there's lots of different kinds of knowledges that play into that being a barista, making coffee, distributing coffee, working with the public, all of that's involved. Now, the traditional university structure focuses, I think, on two of those forms of knowledges. And here we get the science and the arts, right? Episteme and theoria. But they neglect the part of the art that rhetoric really gets at. Tecne, metis, kairos, situational part of the art, contextual parts of the art. Example 2. At Miami, I teach a course in data visualization, the rhetoric of information and data visualization. And partly that course involves teaching the basics of making charts and graphs using tools like Excel, Canva, Tableau, that kind of thing. So some of this is mechanical, basic how-to stuff. In the classical world, this was called prima elementa. And all arts have prima elementa. You have to learn the scales and basic fingering to play a flute or a guitar. That's prima elementa. That is necessary stuff. But it is not all the stuff. And the art should not be acquainted with the prima elementa, right? And that's what happens in the data visualization class. We are quickly moving to larger rhetorical concerns. How do you make Excel do what you want it to do, which is to create something useful, beautiful, honest, accurate, and true? when I look at the design literature and the design advice in the field of graphic design, they are always talking about useful and beautiful, useful and beautiful. That's what data visualization is for, useful and beautiful. And sometimes they'll throw in the third, true, accurate. Right. I want to keep that in there. But beauty is very much a part of it, aesthetically pleasing, but useful is number one. And that's the guiding question for the data visualization class. What will be useful, valuable, important for some audience? How will it transform something? How will it change people's thinking? How will it move people to act differently? How will it make the state of affairs better for some audience in some situation? That is the ultimate question. So praxis is the center of rhetoric. So 1 minute in this class, we're talking about, how do you label your x-axis in Excel? And the next minute, we're getting into these abstruse discussions about, you're mapping diversity demographics in a line graph. And suddenly the word diversity pops up, and you have to have a philosophical discussion about diversity and who's defining it how. And these people over here define diversity this way, and these people over here define it a different way. How can you count stuff if there's different definitions of diversity? I say, you just learned that counting is rhetorical, right? Whenever you count something, you attach a category, and as soon as you attach a category, you got a fight on your hands. There's a disagreement about how the category applies. So rhetoric is right there, working in. I love the fact that this course counts for the quantitative literacy requirement at Miami. Like, I'm teaching a course that counts for quantitative literacy. Wow, this is incredible. I'm like a math teacher. Wow. I never imagined that. So, with making coffee, there are various forms of knowledge involved, and let me just spit out a few of them. Production tool knowledge, how to make tools work, how to use tools for distribution, how to make tools for construction. Process, how-to knowledge, how to work in groups, how to maneuver the features of Excel. Design knowledge, certainly a huge part of a data visualization course. And then all kinds of different sorts of inventional or research knowledge. Collecting accurate, reliable data, sifting it through a process, understanding what's reliable, what isn't reliable. Looking at the story or message that I'm developing with data, and then realizing there are rival hypotheses, there are counter stories. And here's where I've thrown in the classical parts of speech in here to show that those have a certain functionality in this discussion. We teach partitio, we teach refutatio, we teach confirmatio. We don't use those terms, but that's what we're doing. Kairos is huge. My students in my data visualization class were doing a chart for the marketing part of the university, and they sent a visualization in, and the person responded back and said, "We would have loved this data visualization 2 weeks ago. We would have published it, we would have shared it, we would have distributed it. 2 weeks ago, now, not so good." The students were like, "What? 2 weeks? Yeah, it changes that quickly." So suddenly, the rhetoric techne just got very complicated. We're not teaching an introductory gen ed course. This is an advanced course. We're working across multiple forms of knowledge. This is a capstone course. This is the culmination of the academic curriculum, its highest point. And that's a course where rhetoric sat in the classical Humanities. It was the end point of education, its highest point. All right, university mission and structure. There has always been a tension between the idealistic view of education, aimed at veritas, or knowledge, or in 19th century Germany, Wissenschaft, versus a more practical view aimed at bonum civitatem, civic involvement, engagement with the world, and all its messiness, diversity, and imperfections. This was the battle between Plato's and Isocrates, two different academies in classical Athens. It was the battle between scholasticism and humanism in the Renaissance. In the late 19th century, it was the battle between the German disciplinary research university model and the land-grant university mission that emphasized the practical applied arts of agriculture, technology, and mining. So in a sense, this tension between pure and practical is built into the very institutional history of the university. And we can see this tension played out in some university mottos. Here are some older universities. University of Michigan, Artes Scientia Veritas, Art, Science, Truth, Yale, Lux et Veritas, and Harvard just Veritas. The Findlay one is down here. It's got, I can't remember what it was, but it's got Libertas, Scientia, Libertas, Religio. Yeah, so it's got religion in the mix, okay. Compare those mottos to some other models. The University of Texas, San Antonio. A cultivated mind is the guardian of democracy. Howard University, Veritas et Utilitas, truth and service. Ohio State University, Disciplina et Civitatem, education for citizenship. And then Michigan State didn't bother with the Latin. Advancing knowledge, transforming lives. But yeah, okay, there's the divided mission. Well, it should fit together, right? It should be coordinated and coherent and make sense together. That's how it should work. But this is the battle between Plato's and Isocrates' competing schools in 4th century BC Athens. Plato's school focused on a variety of subjects, but rhetoric was a fairly minor concern. Where the two schools differed profoundly is in their view of the relationship between truth and rhetoric. In Plato, truth came first and was absolute, and rhetoric was dangerous in that it comes second and always tends to mess with the truth. It obscures the truth. It creates a problem because it's always got to deal with the problem of flattering an audience, right? In Isocrates' model, rhetoric is not second. It is the necessary tool for coming to the truth. It is first, through interaction with audience. Isocrates argues that it is the ability to form an active judgment about a situation, decide what is the best course of action that mark a person as educated and possessed of practical wisdom. For the sophists and for Isocrates, this context was democracy. The right decision was the one reached as a result of debate and of subsequent compromise, the outcome of pragmatic consensus. The audience was involved in constructing the position, not just the passive receivers of it, right? Isocrates' notion of the goal of rhetoric, its telos, was born in the Athenian notion of the guest's right to protection and compassion, or what was known in Greek culture as xenia, the guest-friend relationship. Your first obligation, the presumption about your behavior toward an unknown person, was that you were to treat them well with respect and graciousness as a friend. You were to bring them in your house, because that unknown person might be a god. The rhetoric of the open hand. So the Greek term xenia means guest friendship. It was a central principle to the culture, and a central principle in Isocratean rhetoric, although it doesn't emerge so strongly in Plato or Aristotle. And of course, the opposite of that is xenophobia. So to violate xenia was to invite the wrath of the gods, and it was a common theme in Greek tragedy. The word xenia is all over Greek tragedy because the tragic moment is often when that principle is violated. So the sophistic or Isocratean model of the humanities aims at the good of the polis and on building and maintaining healthy relations with neighbors and strangers alike. And of course, rhetoric, language interaction is the key to that process. Xenia is right down the road, by the way, right? The city of hospitality. Go visit it. The Platonic model favors the ideal, the abstract, and the theoretical, and is less focused on the material, the technical, the economic. In the Platonic model, Tecna, making things, is not as important as theoria, which in Greek means to wonder, behold, observe, and speculate. In the Platonic model, the focus is on studying about rather than engaging or intervening in. The Platonic model leads ultimately to a posture of impatience with the world, disdain and disengagement with the world, or it can, because the world can never quite measure up to the ideal. So that kind of brings us up to where we are. The modern disciplinary university. The idea of knowledge for its own sake became a primary focus for the emergent late 19th century American university focused on the German disciplinary model, which is sometimes called the Humboldt Model, after Wilhelm von Humboldt, a professor at the University of Berlin in the early 19th century. The primary focus of this model was on disciplinary Wissenschaft, systematic research and scholarship. It's basically where the research model came from. Knowledge and truth became the standards, not practical usefulness. The professorate focused less on social and political matters, did less civic interaction, and went to the laboratories and focused more on becoming subject matter experts and specialized researchers. Organizationally, now we're talking about the time period here post-Civil War in the United States, the birth of the research university. Organizationally, it was deemed important to organize faculty into distinct disciplinary specializations. The departmental system came into place in a number of key research institutions by the 1890s. The English major, as a belletristic literature major, was born at this time at Harvard under the leadership of Francis James Child in the period from 1872 to 1910. During that period, English fought a hard battle with the prevailing powers, the classicists, but eventually won out, establishing English as the premier humanities department in the new disciplinary university. So what we see in the structure of the modern university as it comes into being in the early 20th century is the ascendancy of the Platonic view of truth, coupled with a 19th century German university model based on disciplinary knowledge, focused on research taught through the lecture and codified into a departmental institutional structure. Rhetoric has no clear place in this model because it is a transdiscipline that cuts across and intersects with various subject matters and areas. It's really not a discipline. So while rhetoric was, up until the mid-19th century, the core of higher education, it is no longer. For 2,100 years, the study and the production of persuasion, rhetoric, formed the core of the humanities and linked the humanities to the practical life of the everyday citizen. That was what rhetoric does. It took in the curriculum. Its position was to link the knowledge from the curriculum to the world. It was the archstone in that sense. Rhetoric, in other words, made the humanities relevant to the political and religious life of society. All right. So rhetoric got out of sync. Can we get it back into sync? So here are some features about my position at Miami University. I have a joint faculty appointment in the Department of English and the Armstrong Institute for Interactive Media Studies. I teach a course that's fully online called IMS JRN Journalism 424/524 Ethics and Digital Media. I describe my field affiliation as rhetoric and professional communication. Do you see the problem here? I am Exhibit A, that something has gone seriously wrong at the university. I think there's a, I'm in a position here, maybe it's transitional, but it's certainly a position of tension between an old model of doing things and some new model that hasn't quite emerged. I've got, a foot in both camps. Ames is not a department. It doesn't even sit in a single college. Its faculty are all jointly appointed, coming from every college in the university. It is some kind of trans or subdisciplinary thing focused on interactivity, whatever that is. I believe I'm the only person who has ever taught a 3-prefixed course at Miami University. I think that's the case. So again, I'm somewhere between journalism. That makes no sense. IMS English, and my course, gets the quantitative literacy stamp of approval. I mean, what is going on here? Something is definitely breaking down, and I'm the cause of the problem, I guess. So for an RCM-based budgeting model like Miami has, I'm a nightmare. The administrators can't figure out how to credit my SCHs, my student credit hours. I'm teaching something that violates a number of sacred disciplinary boundaries. I exist in the interstices of the institution's 19th century disciplinary and administrative category system. And this is a problem. And I'm glad to be sitting right there and creating this kind of problem. There's some interesting things going on. Let's look at one set of numbers. This represents the number of majors in 3 programs over a period of about 16 years. So on the far left, you can't read it, I'm sorry about that. From 2000 to 2016, tracking the number of majors in creative writing, professional writing, and literature over that 16-year period. What it looks like is a story about the decline of the English major from its high point in 2005 to its current point in 2016, 132 majors, and the professional writing major created in 2011 is to blame. All the majors went from one place to the other. That's not what happened, but anyway, that's what it looks like. Notice that there's no such thing here as an English major. There are rather different majors housed in the Department of English. Professional writing is a distinct major. It's not a concentration within English major. Figure 2 adds a line to the story. The top line is the total number of majors across the 3 programs, and that tells a little different story, right? The numbers have held up pretty well over 16 years. In fact, in 2005, there were 414 majors. In English, in 2016, there were 498. They have distributed themselves differently. Creative writing majors, number of creative writing majors is going up as well. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking the majors that are doing well are the Tecna majors. These are the 2 majors that focus on production. There's another set of data to add to the story. This table shows the number of faculty in each of those 3 programs and the ratio of faculty to majors. And you can see that there's a huge imbalance. The department, construction of the construction of the department's professorate is not correspondent to the number of majors. It's running behind. It's back there in 2000 or 1990 or maybe 1975, I'm not sure. There's an imbalance there. And I'm sure this is your story too. In some sense or other, this is going on all over the place. The old university model is not changing fast enough to keep up with where things are going. And you're thinking, I'm drowning here and you're describing the water. Okay, well, that's right. That's where we're going to discuss what we go do about this. But I think a few things here to close up. Every few centuries or so in the history of the university, there's a crisis, and we have to engage in a dramatic reshaping and restructuring of our system, and that's what we're looking at now. It happened, and I've been studying this a little bit, between 1865 and 1920, the modern disciplinary university was born, and that was a period of intense struggle, battles, movement of finances and creation of departments, and there were some ugly things going on. And I think we're coming to that point, or in that point now. And I see that as something to be excited about. It's an opportunity. We shouldn't be fearful about it. At the same time, we've got to be careful to preserve what is fundamental to our mission. What is good for students? What do they need to know how to do? We have obligations to help them. What do they need to become? Students I see at Miami, I think, are ahead of the university in this regard. They're breaking the stranglehold of the disciplinary mindset. They're insisting on practical education. They're insisting on transdisciplinarity. A huge percentage of Miami students flock to practical majors, but they also choose double majors, and they make their own hybrid degrees, and they do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and they put together their own programs in very creative ways, and I think that they're right. That's the way to do it. They're moving in the direction of an education based on transdisciplinary Tecna, and I think that's what they need. So I know you already know this, and you are doing this, but I also suspect that your colleagues and administrators at your home institutions do not. So I think it's worth reviewing the argument for why rhetoric matters, what place it serves in the world, why it's not remedial, why it's not just an entry or intro course, why it's really advanced, why it's a capstone experience, why the art is complicated and intellectually challenging, and why this art matters. It connects the university to the world, and that's where we should be. We've always been good at this, I think, but university, we need to fix that problem. All right, I'm going to end there, and thank you for being here.
We have time for questions if anybody has a question sparked by Jim's interesting focus. I know it's early, there's some coffee.
I have questions for you.
Yeah.
Is what is going on in Miami going on at your place in a similar way, a different way, not at all?
If somebody wants to share, raise your hand and I'll bring the mic.
Was this a computers and writing talk? Don't answer.
Thank you for coming all that way. I was so far away. Thank you, Dr. Porter. I think that the story that I have to share speaks to exactly what you've been saying. I was in a meeting with the Iowa Board of Regents, and I was part of a student group who was trying to revise the diversity credit at our school because there were classes that fell under that umbrella that we felt did not actually teach about diversity and inclusion. The pushback that I got from the, of course, much better educated faculty than I were the Platonic view that you were describing. It was, we are here to cultivate expertise. And the challenge then for those of us who were students in the room then became to say, well, when it comes to issues of diversity and inclusion, that sort of, I think, caring for bodies that you were describing, the way that language affects bodies, then we tried to argue from the position of expertise. So to give another example, there was a faculty member that said, while I was sitting next to a gender non-conforming person, that there are only two genders, and that our restrooms should reflect that, and that was his personal expertise as an engineering professor. And I think that in that conversation, I wish I would have had the benefit of hearing you speak today, because again, I started to say from a position of expertise of just like what you just said, sir, it flies in the face of what we know from queer theory and literary theory, sociology and what have you, to say nothing of the way the university conducts itself within multicultural student affairs and such. And I wish that I would have maybe just embraced my experience as a rhetorician at the time and say that no, part of my training too is to look at the way that which language shapes our understanding of the world, maybe obscures it, but really is central to how we understand it. And the language that you are using, sir, is incorrect. I think that's kind of what you're pushing us towards, and maybe you're sort of pushing us to teach that in our classrooms. Maybe you can speak a little bit better to that.
That's a great example, what you just described, and I've been in that kind of situation a lot in my life. It takes the form I hear it is something like this. Well, yeah, that's a nice thing to do if students can engage the world, but they shouldn't engage the world until they know what they're doing. So we're going to work. We got to do expertise first, right? We have to make sure they're experts, then they can graduate and they go out in the world. The university's job is not to do that. What do you say to that? Well, yeah, we want students to be informed and knowledgeable, but they're already engaging the world. Issues of diversity and gender issues are already there in their world. That's there. They're coming from a world in which that's there. It's the campus world. So, it's not like we can put all that on hold and then teach them stuff. But that's the Platonic move toward, we're going to study about something rather than studying it by engaging it. So why can't we teach a diversity course that is community involvement, engagement, with a nonprofit, organization? And what are they going to learn? They're going to learn diversity on the ground, and it's going to be messier than anything I can do in the classroom. But that's the battle. And here's where we got a problem with this battle, because to do the first thing, to teach you about stuff, I can do that in a lecture hall of 100 students and pretend I'm teaching you about it. To do engaged learning, it's got to be smaller, right? 20? There's an issue right now. Small classes are targets for universities. I haven't figured that one out. Thank you.
Going to that point, I was thinking that it's almost like they want to treat undergraduates as children, as if they don't know anything, but then not give them the credit and the access and the tolerance that we actually give children, because we believe that it's required developmentally for them to learn things. So you can't treat someone as a child, but then not give them the opportunities that we afford children. So it's like you said, it's all about, it's the money that's driving it.
Yeah.
Put them in big classes, reduce their connection to the world, make it easier to manage.
And it's treating them as children, the in loco parentis problem, absolutely. And they're not. In the classical model, rhetoric was taught to boys 14, 15, 16. We're talking about kids. I hate referring to students as kids. I don't do that. They're adults. They're 18. You know, they're in the world. And rhetoric is an advanced topic that they're already doing. We can provide guidance and help. That's our job, but it should be engaged. It's a different mindset than the research mindset that sees students as blank slates that don't have research knowledge. So we give them 4 years worth of it so they can sort of catch up. Different model.
I am looking at this last slide and see that you kind of snuck ethos. And I'm interested to know in what way does ethos play a role in our role as teachers of Tecna?
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that. Yeah, that's a great question.
We are live streaming, so we'll try to get all the questions. No, that's okay. Yeah.
In the 19th century liberal arts college, I didn't talk about this part of it because it was take too long, but 19th century liberal arts college, there was another focus for education, and that was creating the good citizen or good preacher or good person who would do work in the world. That was the 19th century liberal arts college model. So ethos was the goal. You were to become a good person in this particular field, usually law, government, or preaching. You know, the key focus for rhetoric in the 18th and 19th century. And I think that's part of what we do too. We want good citizens who are good professionals in a given area, writing professionals, for instance, or technical communication professionals, but also citizens. I think we've got both of those things working. And so our professional writing major at Miami is geared for students who will become writing professionals, but we want them to be responsible citizens, so the focus of the curriculum aims at both of those, working in concert. There's not two things, it's really one thing. But that's what I mean by, that's why I snuck ethos in there.
So I'd like to speak to some of your ideas about what some of us could do on the ground, shifting these strangely placed walls between disciplines that happen not necessarily because of epistemic ideas, but because of politics, campus politics. So like on my campus, if you put a certain word in a course name, another department will come swooping in to take it. If you put the word management, like writing for management, our business college said, no, you can't have that word in a course, and et cetera. And at our university, your ethics class with the word ethics in it would be in the philosophy, done deal. And yet we have combo departments. We used to have journalism. They moved over somewhere else, and it's become almost this game of risk. What are some of the things that you see we could maybe do on the ground about these boundaries?
That's a great question, and The word police are out there, absolutely, and I have dealt with them my whole career. Michigan State, we tried to get a course called Visual Rhetoric into our curriculum, and the art department went crazy. We own the word visual. You know, we'll deal with the visual, we'll deal with the design, you deal with the words.
Our communication studies department owns the word rhetoric.
And web authoring, I forget what year it was, but web authoring was a word we couldn't word because one department tried to claim that web design was our purview, not yours. And so we got visual rhetoric through, I think, by calling it visual rhetoric for professional writers. That was our compromise. I'm surprised we got it through at all. When I tried to teach a course in argument, a philosophy professor objected, and I had to go in front of the curriculum committee and make an argument for why rhetoric should have the term argument. No, you deal with persuasion, he said. We deal with argument. We got the course through. I started going into Aristotle's posterior analytics, and he was kind of stunned. He expected anything but that, and so it helped that the category's murky here. We'll cover the rhetoric side, but so I got that course through by calling it rhetoric, persuasion, and argument to distinguish it from real argument that had to do with logic. So there's a lot of compromises involved, but I find this less of a problem now than I used to. At Miami, there seems to be less policing of the terms, that people are more open to the things. I was holding my breath when I stuck the course ethics and digital media forward. Nothing happened. But you're right. The old disciplinary model rears up, and then you have to engage it and argue it and maybe make a compromise to get something through. And once it's through, you can do what you want.
We now have an interdisciplinary degree. Interdisciplinarity seems to be the word of the season, except we called it the BIS, Bachelor of Interdisciplinary Studies, and everyone else calls it the BGS, the bogus degree.
Yeah.
And so there's perception in the community and among students about how to handle tearing down those walls.
It's really tricky stuff. I mean, you don't want to major in rhetoric, do you? No. I wouldn't want to. I'm the fiercest advocate of rhetoric you'll ever find, I'm guessing, but we're not going to create a major called rhetoric. That would be the death of the students who got it. But interactive media studies is one way we've sort of created a place where interdisciplinary interests can merge and work together that doesn't seem to step on anybody's toes, although every once in a while communication folks come in and say, wait a minute, you can't do that, or you can't do this. So yeah, I mean, we're fighting that battle all the time with the disciplinary university. Thanks. Has anybody solved this problem? Well, you kind of have to just put programs on paper and push them through, new courses, new programs, and build allies across departments, because I'm seeing there are more allies in other departments than there were 10 or 20 years ago. People are less, I think, the younger faculty are less invested in those disciplinary categories than the senior faculty, so I think there's promise and hope there. So I just try to work the spaces that I can, and sometimes you run into a brick wall, and if it's a brick wall, you go somewhere where there isn't a brick wall. You can't get through the brick wall. Those brick walls have to retire.
I don't know that we've figured out a solution to, but I do wonder, this wouldn't help necessarily on courses, informing courses, but where do you see the role of Centers for Teaching and Learning or libraries in solving this problem? Because there's not that as much of a need to have that disciplinary separation. In fact, the job of those centers is to not have that.
That's a great question. So I was talking with our new university president last summer, and he said something like, if you were going to create a new university from scratch today, You wouldn't have the departments we have. You would have the centers and programs would be the basis of your curriculum, because those are transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary. Those are doing the interesting work in the world, and that's where your university would be. And I said, great, let's do it, go, you're the president, you can. He said, no, not that easy. You know, the department structure is there, and there's people are heavily invested in it. Their careers and identities are invested in it, and it's still. I'm an advocate of faculty governance, but I detest it when it's standing for a structure that keeps us from doing what students need. But I think you're right, programs and centers, and again, the field of composition has been ahead of the game on this, right? The writing center model was a way to get an entity outside of the disciplinary model to create help for students. If you've argued for computer classrooms or computer resources, you're working the same issue, because the prejudice that I remember from 30 years ago that's still in place a lot of places is technology is for the scientists. You're teaching writing, you don't need the technology, you don't need the lab. You know, in 1988, we were making that argument at Purdue to get a computer classroom to teach writing. The engineers were like, what are you thinking of? You know, no, that can't happen. So, you know, that's where you're pushing the boundaries of the university, forcing them to rethink the categories. Yeah, I think you're right. Centers, programs, that's the way to go.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have more in store, so please join us back in Davis Building for session A and snacks and coffee and stuff like that. Again, if you're going to the Black Multicultural Heritage Library and Center for that Wonder Workshop, that shuttle is right out here in the AMU Circle Drive. It's going to be an amazing presentation. I hope you'll hop on and take a look. The presentation is about 20 minutes, and then you get to